Blood trickled down Police Chief Wilson's face as he stared into the eyes of the man everyone had underestimated. The obese black man they had tormented for months now held the evidence that would destroy them all. "You should have left my family alone," Marcus whispered. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more stories about underestimated heroes fighting against injustice. Now let's find out how this confrontation began and what pushed this peaceful man to his breaking point. Marcus Reed appeared to be nothing special to most residents of Riverdale, Georgia. At 48 years old, his 6-foot frame carried nearly 300 pounds, and his preference for baggy clothes and reading glasses completed the image of a harmless, overweight bookstore owner. The small shop he ran, Reed's, sat nestled between a barber shop and a soul food restaurant on the less affluent side of town. Most customers who browsed his carefully curated selection of literature had no idea they were being assisted by a man who had once commanded some of America's most elite soldiers in combat operations across 27 countries. After 20 years of distinguished service with the Delta Force, Marcus had retired with honors that remained sealed in classified files, choosing to build a quiet life with his wife Serena, a former military intelligence analyst, and their teenage children Zora and James. The family had settled in Riverdale 3 years ago, drawn by its affordable housing and seemingly peaceful atmosphere. Marcus had deliberately cultivated his unassuming appearance, letting his muscle tone soften beneath a layer of fat, growing a salt and pepper beard, and adopting the posture of a man who posed no threat to anyone. This careful construction of a new identity was his way of distancing himself from the violence that had defined his earlier life and protecting his family from the shadows of his past. The transition to civilian life had been surprisingly smooth until the arrival of Police Chief Robert Wilson 6 months ago. The change in leadership at the Riverdale Police Department had been immediately noticeable to someone with Marcus's training. Patrol patterns shifted, certain areas of town suddenly received heightened police presence, and there was a marked increase in arrests within the predominantly black neighborhoods. What most citizens failed to recognize, but Marcus's tactical mind immediately identified, was the systematic nature of these changes. The first direct encounter came when 17-year-old James borrowed Marcus's car to pick up groceries. Marcus was reviewing inventory orders when his phone rang with his son's panicked voice. "Dad, I'm being pulled over. They've got guns drawn. I didn't do anything." Marcus arrived at the scene 7 minutes later to find James handcuffed and seated on the curb, while officers Denton and Ramirez rummaged through his vehicle without a warrant. "That's my car," and my son Marcus stated calmly, keeping his hands visible as he approached. Officer Denton's hand immediately moved to his weapon. "Back up, big man. Your boy was speeding, and we have reason to believe there might be contraband in the vehicle." Marcus noted how Denton emphasized "your boy" with a subtle sneer. "My son wasn't speeding. The groceries in the back seat are still upright, and you need consent or a warrant to search my vehicle." The officers exchanged glances before Denton stepped forward, deliberately invading Marcus's personal space. "Look at Fat Albert here, thinking he knows the law. You people always act like you know everything until you're looking at charges." Marcus maintained his composure, noticing how Officer Ramirez seemed uncomfortable with his partner's behavior while continuing the illegal search. When they found nothing, they issued James a citation for erratic driving and a broken taillight that Marcus knew hadn't been broken before the stop. As the officers finally allowed them to leave, Denton called out, "Drive safe, Biggie. We'll be seeing you around." As they drove home, Marcus noted a patrol car following at a distance, and later that evening he observed the same vehicle passing their house at regular intervals. At the dinner table, he maintained a calm demeanor, while his mind cataloged patrol patterns, officer behaviors, and potential threats. His military instincts, dormant for years, began to reawaken as he recognized the systematic nature of what was happening. This wasn't random harassment, it was tactical intimidation with a purpose. As he helped James process the trauma of the encounter, teaching him the survival strategies black men had passed down for generations about police interactions, Marcus noticed Officer Jenkins filming the encounter, showing signs of discomfort with his colleague's behavior. That night, after his family had gone to bed, Marcus stood at his kitchen window watching another patrol car drive slowly past his home. His fingers absently traced an old combat scar on his forearm, as his mind began calculating angles, vulnerabilities, and contingencies assessment patterns he hadn't accessed in years. Marcus arrived at his bookstore on a Tuesday morning to find the front windows shattered and racial slurs spray-painted across the storefront. Books lay scattered and damaged throughout the shop, many doused with an unidentifiable liquid that reeked of urine. As he surveyed the destruction, carefully photographing everything before touching the scene, the police arrived with a squeal of tires rather than the measured response of officers investigating vandalism. Officers Michaels and Reynolds entered, with hands resting on their weapons, immediately treating the space as though Marcus were the perpetrator rather than the victim. "Looks like somebody doesn't want your kind of business around here," Officer Michaels remarked while making a show of taking notes he never referred to again. "You got insurance, Reed, because cleanup's gonna cost you." Reynolds wandered behind the counter without permission, rifling through Marcus's business records. "Awful lot of books about civil rights and black history. You running some kind of political operation here?" The question carried an implicit threat that Marcus recognized from interrogation techniques he'd both witnessed and utilized in different contexts. "I'm running a bookstore that serves the community," he replied evenly. "Are you planning to dust for fingerprints or collect any evidence?" Officer Michaels snorted. "Budget cuts. We don't do that for every little vandalism case. File a report online like everybody else." They left without taking statements from neighboring businesses or examining the security camera mounted above the barbershop next door. 3 days later, Serena called Marcus in a barely controlled panic. "I'm being followed," she whispered into the phone. "The same police car has tailed me from the grocery store to the bank and now to the pharmacy. The officer keeps getting out whenever I do and standing nearby." Marcus instructed her to remain in public spaces and told her he was on his way. When he arrived, he found Serena being aggressively questioned by Officer Bennett, who had her pinned against her car. "My wife has done nothing wrong," Marcus stated, approaching slowly with hands visible. "Remove your hands from her immediately." Bennett swung around one hand, still gripping Serena's wrist. "This your woman?" She was acting suspiciously, possibly casing locations for theft. Then she resisted questioning. Serena's eyes flashed with fury. "I did not resist. I asked why I was being followed and you grabbed me." The confrontation ended only when another shopper began filming with her phone, causing Bennett to release Serena with a warning. "You people need to understand how things work in this town now." That night, while Serena applied ice to the bruises forming on her wrist, Marcus slipped out after midnight. Dressed in black clothing that hadn't seen use since his military days, he moved silently through his neighborhood, noting patrol patterns, shift changes, and officer behaviors. He identified 3 vehicles that routinely circulated near black-owned businesses, documenting license plates and officer names. Over the next week, he expanded his reconnaissance, photographing officers conducting what appeared to be protection rackets at several establishments. At a small barbecue restaurant, he witnessed the owner reluctantly handing over cash to Officer Reynolds, who pocketed it without writing a receipt. The following day, Marcus contacted an old teammate, Carlos Rodriguez, who now worked with the FBI. Their conversation was deliberately vague, discussing hypothetical situations and jurisdiction questions, rather than specifics that could trigger official involvement before Marcus was ready. Hypothetically, if local law enforcement were engaged in systematic civil rights violations, which federal bodies would have jurisdiction, Carlos provided information about the FBI's Civil Rights Division and the Department of Justice, along with advice about documentation requirements. Hypothetical evidence would need to be rock solid, Carlos warned. The blue wall is real, and small-town corruption can have deep roots. The situation escalated when Zora came home from school, visibly upset. Chief Wilson's son Brad had cornered her in the hallway, making explicit racial and sexual comments while bragging that his father owned this town. When she reported the harassment to a teacher, she was the one given detention for making trouble. That weekend, Marcus witnessed officers planting drugs in the car of Andre Johnson, a black teenager who worked part-time at the local community center. Using a telephoto lens from his military days, Marcus captured clear images of Officer Denton removing a small bag from his pocket and placing it under the driver's seat before discovering it during a search. The following Monday, Marcus received 5 separate citations for his bookstore, ranging from signage violations to fire code infractions that had mysteriously appeared since the last inspection 3 months earlier. "Just doing our job," Officer Reynolds smirked as he handed over the citations. "Chief wants everything by the book in this town. You understand books, don't you, Reed?" That evening, as Marcus reviewed the financial impact of the citations, he noticed a police cruiser parked across from their home. It remained there all night, its presence, an unmistakable message, "We're watching you." As he closed the curtains, Marcus caught Serena studying him with concerned eyes. "I know that look," she said quietly. "That's your assessment look from the old days." Marcus didn't deny it. "Something systematic is happening here. This isn't random harassment." Serena nodded slowly. "So, what are we going to do about it?" Marcus glanced at the family photos on their wall, lingering on the images of Zora and James. "First, we document everything. Then we find out exactly what we're dealing with." Outside, the police cruiser's engine started as another officer arrived for the surveillance shift change. The call came during the busiest hour at the bookstore. Serena's voice tight with controlled panic. "They've arrested Zora. We need to go to the station now." Marcus found his daughter in a holding cell, her eyes red but her spine straight as steel. According to the arresting officer's report, a routine locker search had discovered marijuana in Zora's backpack. A backpack that had never left her sight except during gym class, which she shared with Brad Wilson. When Marcus requested to see the evidence, Officer Michaels sneered, "Procedure, big man. Can't have Daddy contaminating the chain of custody. Besides, you look like you've eaten enough evidence in your lifetime." The racial undertones and body-shaming comments continued as Marcus completed paperwork for Zora's temporary release pending a juvenile court hearing. Officer Denton patted his stomach mockingly as they waited. "You know what they say, once you go fat, you never go back. Or is that something else?" The other officers laughed, making comments about black girls ending up in the system eventually, while Zora sat with clenched fists. Marcus placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, their silent signal from childhood that meant, "Stay calm, I've got this." The following morning, Serena attempted to file formal complaints about both Zora's arrest and the ongoing harassment. The desk sergeant refused to provide the necessary forms, claiming they were out of stock, and suggesting she take her concerns to the community liaison officer, a position that had been vacant for 8 months. 3 days later, James texted that he was being pulled over again. When 30 minutes passed without further communication, Marcus and Serena drove the route he would have taken from basketball practice. They found his car empty, hazard lights still blinking. At the police station, Officer Reynolds claimed ignorance until Marcus demanded to speak with a supervisor. Only then were they directed to Riverdale General Hospital, where they found James handcuffed to a bed, his face swollen, one eye completely shut, and his breathing labored from what would later be diagnosed as 3 broken ribs and a punctured lung. According to the police report, James had resisted arrest and attempted to flee, necessitating physical intervention. The attending physician pulled Marcus aside, her voice low. "This isn't the first case like this I've seen since the new chief arrived. These injuries aren't consistent with a fall or standard restraint techniques." As she spoke, 2 uniformed officers appeared in the doorway. "Just checking on our suspect," one announced loudly, "making sure Fat Albert Jr. here isn't trying to escape justice." When Serena demanded they leave, the officer placed a hand on his weapon. "Public building, ma'am. We go where we want." Later that night, as James finally fell asleep under the influence of pain medication, a nurse slipped Marcus a USB drive. "I've been documenting cases," she whispered. "Similar injuries, similar victims, similar officers. The hospital administration won't act, but somebody should know." The drive contained dozens of photographs and medical reports, all involving Black and Latino patients who had encountered Riverdale police. As Marcus reviewed the evidence at James's bedside, he noticed something in his own behavior changing. His responses to hospital staff became clipped and precise. his eyes constantly scanning exit routes and potential threats, his body automatically positioning itself between his family and the door. He was falling back into operational patterns from his military days, assessing tactical situations rather than social ones. Officer Jenkins, the youngest member of the force who had seemed uncomfortable during James's first traffic stop, approached Marcus in the hospital cafeteria. Looking nervously over his shoulder, he spoke quickly. "I joined to help people. What they're doing isn't right, but they'll destroy anyone who speaks up. They've done it before." Before Marcus could respond, Jenkins walked away, leaving behind a napkin with a phone number. That evening, while Serena stayed with James, Marcus met with Carlos Rodriguez at a diner 30 miles outside town. After reviewing the evidence, Carlos's professional demeanor cracked. "This is systematic civil rights abuse, possibly RICO territory with the protection rackets. But there's something else going on. This level of focus on your family specifically doesn't make sense." The answer came 2 days later when Marcus overheard Chief Wilson speaking with the mayor outside City Hall. "The bookstore property is the final piece we need for the distribution route. Every other owner has sold. Convince Reed to leave town or we'll find other methods of persuasion." The final straw came in the form of a simple white envelope delivered to their home address, an address that wasn't publicly linked to the bookstore. Inside was a single photograph of Serena leaving the hospital, taken with a telephoto lens, with the words, "Accidents happen to pretty ladies all the time," written on the back. "Do you think Marcus should report this escalating harassment to federal authorities immediately, or take matters into his own hands?" Comment number 1. If you believe he should trust the system despite everything that's happened, or number 2. If you think it's time for him to use his special skills to protect his family. Like this video if you've ever witnessed or experienced racial profiling, and subscribe to hear more stories of justice and resilience. The question now is, how far would you go to protect your loved ones when the very people sworn to protect them become the threat? Stay tuned to see what Marcus does next when pushed beyond his breaking point. That night, after ensuring Serena and Zora were safely asleep, Marcus descended into the basement of their home. He moved a heavy storage shelf with practiced ease, revealing a false wall that concealed a reinforced door with a biometric lock. The small room beyond had remained sealed since they moved in a space Marcus had hoped never to access again. The air inside smelled of gun oil and metal as he activated a small battery-powered light. The walls held specialized equipment, communications, gear surveillance devices, tactical clothing, and a weapons case containing items he had been legally permitted to retain after his honorable discharge. Marcus ran his fingers over a satellite phone before powering it on and entering a series of codes that would bounce his signal through multiple servers. Authorization. Sierra Tango 9947 Delta. He spoke clearly into the device. Requesting callback on secure protocol mission designation, Homeward Shield. Within 30 minutes, the phone vibrated with an encrypted response. Marcus spoke for exactly 7 minutes, his voice returning to the clipped, precise cadence of command that had once directed some of America's most classified operations. By dawn, Marcus had converted the basement into an operations center with maps of Riverdale covering one wall, surveillance photos of police officers on another, and a detailed organizational chart of the department's hierarchy. A secure laptop now contained the evidence he had been gathering, categorized and cross-referenced for tactical analysis. As morning light filtered through the high basement windows, Marcus reviewed a mission dossier he had compiled during the night, addressing every aspect of what he now recognized as a sophisticated criminal operation, using police authority as cover. A memory surfaced as he worked the mountains of eastern Afghanistan 12 years earlier. His Delta Force team had been ambushed during an extraction surrounded by enemy forces, with superior numbers and position. 3 team members were severely wounded, including Marcus himself, who had continued commanding the operation despite a bullet lodged 6 inches from his heart. For 14 hours, they had held their position through a combination of tactical deception, psychological operations, and precise application of their limited resources. When extraction finally arrived, the opposing commander had been shocked to discover he had committed over 100 men to fight against 17 American operators. Sometimes, Marcus had told his team afterward, the most powerful weapon is letting your enemy believe you're weak until the moment you prove otherwise. By midday, 3 former teammates had confirmed they would arrive within 24 hours. Jackson Williams, communications specialist, who could intercept any transmission; Elena Torres, infiltration expert, who could access secured facilities undetected; and Michael Washington, weapons specialist with contacts throughout federal law enforcement. Each owed Marcus their lives from various classified operations, and none hesitated when he activated their long-standing pact of mutual aid. While waiting for his team, Marcus began mapping police patrol patterns and shift schedules, identifying vulnerabilities in their operational security. He discovered they used unsecured radio channels for their most sensitive communications, relying on code words rather than encryption. Their evidence room had a single point of access with outdated security, and their computer systems lacked basic intrusion countermeasures. Most critically, Marcus identified patterns suggesting regular drug shipments moving through town, with police escorts clearing specific routes on a predictable schedule. During a surveillance operation that evening, Marcus narrowly avoided detection while placing a tracking device on Chief Wilson's personal vehicle. Following at a safe distance, he observed a midnight meeting between Wilson and a well-dressed man at an abandoned warehouse near the county line. The exchange of a briefcase confirmed his suspicions about the nature of Wilson's operations. Returning home, Marcus found Serena waiting in the kitchen, a familiar look in her eyes. Without words, she placed her laptop beside his surveillance photos. Financial records, she explained her intelligence analyst training, evident in the precision of her work. I've been tracking money flows through city contracts since James was first stopped. There's a pattern of inflated bids and payments to shell companies tied to addresses owned by Wilson's brother-in-law. Marcus nodded, adding her evidence to his growing operational picture. They're not just harassing people, they're running drugs through town and laundering the money through municipal contracts. Serena studied the tactical board he'd assembled. This goes beyond a few corrupt cops, doesn't it? Marcus nodded grimly. The mayor's involved, probably the judge, too. They need our property because it sits at the intersection of their 2 main distribution routes. The harassment isn't random, it's strategic pressure to force us out. Serena's analytical mind quickly processed the implications. So what's our counter-strategy? Marcus revealed a multi-phase operational plan he had designated Operation Cleansing Rain, designed to systematically dismantle the corrupt system while protecting their family. Phase 1, intelligence gathering and documentation. Phase 2, disruption of their operations. Phase 3, exposure and legal action. As he outlined each component, Serena added refinements based on her intelligence background, strengthening the plan's effectiveness. We can't fight them head-on, Marcus explained. They have badges, legal authority, and public perception on their side. But we can use their corruption against them, create internal conflicts, and build an airtight case for federal prosecution. As dawn broke, Marcus finally addressed the question they had both been avoiding. The children need to know what we're doing. They're already targets, and they need to understand the risks and countermeasures. Serena nodded solemnly. They were born into a military family. They're stronger than most people realize. Together, they ascended from the basement as the first light of morning illuminated their home, both aware that they had crossed a threshold from which there would be no return to their carefully constructed civilian life. The team assembled in Marcus's basement operations center within 18 hours of his call. Jackson Williams arrived first, his tall, lanky frame carrying 3 equipment cases filled with electronic surveillance gear. Elena Torres followed shortly after, her nondescript appearance masking the woman who had once infiltrated a presidential palace during a hostage rescue operation. Michael Washington arrived last, driving a van filled with tactical equipment registered to a private security consulting firm that existed only on paper. Marcus briefed them on the situation with military precision, outlining the corruption they faced and the specific threats to his family. This is not a sanctioned operation, he concluded. We're operating without official cover or authority. Anyone uncomfortable with that should leave now. No one moved. Your family is our family, Washington stated simply. just like Kandahar. The reference to the operation where Marcus had carried Washington 3 miles through enemy territory after a severe injury needed no elaboration. With the team assembled, Operation Cleansing Rain moved into active implementation. They established a secure communications network independent of local infrastructure, using encrypted channels and counter-surveillance protocols. Torres began infiltration operations, posing as a county maintenance worker to access municipal buildings and place cameras in key locations. Jackson deployed signal interceptors disguised as utility boxes near the police station, capturing all radio traffic and phone communications. Washington established a secure perimeter around the Reed home, installing motion sensors and surveillance cameras that would alert them to any approach. Marcus divided responsibilities based on each team member's specialties, creating an operational tempo that would keep the corrupt officers constantly off balance. The first psychological operation began at 3 in the morning when every corrupt officer on Marcus's confirmed list received an anonymous text message reading only, "We know what happened to Andre Johnson. Evidence secured." The timing was deliberate, coming just as their night shift ended, ensuring they would carry their unease into their off-duty hours. 3 days later, as Marcus monitored police communications, he intercepted plans for a major drug shipment coming through the Eastern County Road. An anonymous tip to the State Police Drug Task Force delivered through untraceable channels resulted in the seizure of cocaine worth $2 million and the arrest of 3 transporters with no connection to local law enforcement. The resulting chaos on police channels confirmed the effectiveness of the disruption. "They're blaming each other," Jackson reported, as he monitored the encrypted communications. "Wilson thinks one of his officers is working with a rival organization." Chief Wilson's response was swift and predictable, increased pressure on Marcus's family. Serena was pulled over 4 times in a single day, each stop lasting over an hour, as officers claimed discrepancies with her vehicle registration. Zora faced escalating harassment at school from Brad Wilson and his friends, while James, still recovering from his injuries, received wellness checks from patrol officers who entered his hospital room at all hours. Marcus had anticipated this reaction, using each interaction as an opportunity to gather more evidence. Every traffic stop was recorded from multiple angles, every hospital visit documented by trusted medical staff, and every school incident reported through proper channels to establish a paper trail. Meanwhile, Torres successfully infiltrated the police station's evidence room during a shift change, using techniques she had perfected during counterterrorism operations. What she discovered confirmed their worst suspicions files, documenting years of civil rights violations, evidence from unsolved crimes involving minority victims that had been deliberately mishandled, and detailed records of protection, payments from local businesses. Most disturbing were personnel files showing how officers who objected to department practices were systematically framed for misconduct or driven out through manufactured evidence. "This isn't just about drugs or money," Torres reported during their secure briefing. "Wilson's using the department to enforce a specific vision of the town, one where minorities know their place and don't challenge authority." Marcus nodded grimly. "It's about power and control. The drug operation funds it, but the motivation is deeper." Their intelligence gathering revealed a network extending beyond the police department. The mayor facilitated zoning changes to benefit Wilson's real estate investments. The district judge dismissed cases against officers despite clear evidence, and several county officials looked the other way in exchange for kickbacks. Even the local newspaper editor had been compromised, refusing to publish stories about police misconduct. After 2 weeks of reconnaissance and smaller disruptions, Marcus initiated the next phase by leaking selected evidence to Catherine Chen, an investigative journalist with the state newspaper. Her preliminary article questioning the unusual arrest patterns in Riverdale created the first public challenge to Wilson's authority. The operation faced its first significant setback when Officer Jenkins, who had been discreetly providing information about department activities, was discovered. Marcus intercepted police communications indicating Jenkins had been taken to a disciplinary session at an abandoned warehouse outside town. By the time Washington and Marcus arrived, Jenkins had been severely beaten with drugs planted in his personal vehicle. Using their military extraction training, they rescued the unconscious officer and transported him to a hospital in the next county, where Torres had arranged for a trusted doctor to treat him without reporting to local authorities. They were going to kill him and make it look like a drug overdose, Washington observed as they monitored Jenkins' recovery. We've disrupted their operation enough that they're eliminating potential leaks. Marcus nodded grimly, reviewing their operational timeline. Which means we've got them worried. Time to increase the pressure. That night, as Serena coordinated their digital evidence from the operations center, Marcus and his team implemented what they had coded as Phase 2 Echo, the first direct action against Wilson's drug infrastructure. Using intelligence gathered over weeks of surveillance, they identified 3 storage locations used for holding drug shipments before distribution. Rather than destroying the locations which would alert Wilson to the presence of an organized opposition, they implemented a more subtle approach. Washington deployed specialized equipment to contaminate the product with a harmless but detectable chemical marker, while Torres replaced security camera footage with looped recordings showing normal activity. Within 48 hours, Wilson's organization began receiving complaints about product quality from their distributors, creating internal confusion about where the contamination had occurred. The resulting dispute between Wilson and his suppliers created the first significant crack in his operational security. As Marcus monitored the fallout through their surveillance network, he allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. The corrupt system that had targeted his family was beginning to fracture under pressure, its components turning against each other just as he had planned. Outside, the first rays of dawn illuminated a town where the balance of power had begun to shift, though few residents yet realized it. The shadow war had begun in earnest with Marcus Reed, the man they had dismissed as an overweight, harmless bookstore owner, orchestrating a campaign that would systematically dismantle the corruption that had threatened everything he too loved. Chief Wilson slammed his fist onto his desk, scattering reports across the polished surface. "Someone is targeting us specifically," he growled to the assembled officers. First the state police drug bust, then the contaminated shipment, now a journalist asking questions. This isn't coincidence. Marcus watched the emergency meeting through the surveillance system Torres had installed in the ceiling tiles, noting which officers looked nervous and which remained stone-faced. The psychological operation was working, creating distrust within their ranks, exactly as planned. Wilson's next move came swiftly, and with the full force of corrupted authority. A police tactical team raided Reed's during business hours, forcing customers face down on the floor, while officers in balaclavas destroyed inventory, overturned shelves, and eventually discovered a package of cocaine hidden behind the register, planted moments before by Officer Reynolds, while his colleagues created a distraction. Marcus had anticipated the raid, but allowed it to proceed, ensuring that multiple hidden cameras captured the evidence planting from different angles. 4 hours later, as Marcus was processing paperwork at the police station following his arrest, Officer Denton and Sergeant Phillips escorted him to an interrogation room where no cameras were visible. "No cameras, no witnesses," Denton smirked, cracking his knuckles. "Time to teach the fat man some respect." What followed was 40 minutes of calculated brutality strikes to Marcus's torso, where bruising would be less visible pressure points designed to cause maximum pain with minimum marking, and a constant stream of racial slurs and mockery about his weight. "Can't breathe, big boy, maybe lay off the fried chicken." Marcus absorbed the beating without resistance, maintaining the persona of a frightened civilian while using the opportunity to gather intelligence. He noticed which officers participated and which seemed uncomfortable, identified their tactics and training level, and confirmed their procedural violations, all valuable data for his ongoing operation. When they finally returned him to a holding cell, Marcus adopted a posture of defeated submission, hunched and trembling, that belied the methodical assessment taking place behind his eyes. The performance convinced his captors they had broken his spirit exactly as intended. "Not so tough now, are you?" Sergeant Phillips taunted through the cell bars. "Ready to sell that bookstore and leave town." Yet, meanwhile, Serena activated her own network of contacts from her intelligence career. Within hours of Marcus's arrest, 3 former NSA analysts were working to document the constitutional violations in progress and establish secure communications with federal authorities who weren't compromised by Wilson's connections. At their home, the police executed a search warrant with deliberate destructiveness, tearing apart furniture and breaking family heirlooms while searching for additional evidence to plant. They failed to discover the hidden operations center in the basement, protected by construction that Marcus had modified to appear as a standard foundation wall. In school, Zora and James faced escalating intimidation. Officer Ramirez, now assigned as the school resource officer, made a point of following Zora between classes, making comments about how her father was going away for a long time and how pretty girls like her often disappear in prison towns. James, still recovering from his injuries, was cornered in a hallway by Brad Wilson and 2 other boys who told him detailed stories about what happens to boys like him in juvenile detention. At the courthouse, Judge Hamilton, a golf partner of Chief Wilson, denied Marcus bail despite the nonviolent nature of the alleged offense, citing him as a flight risk and danger to the community. The judge also granted unusual procedural motions from the district attorney, delaying evidence discovery and setting a trial date 6 months away, ensuring Marcus would remain incarcerated during the entire pretrial period. Carlos Rodriguez arrived in Riverdale under the cover of a routine federal audit, using his FBI credentials to gain limited access to case files while avoiding alerting Wilson's allies within federal law enforcement. "They've constructed a solid frame-up on paper," he informed Serena during a secured communication. "Multiple officers provided consistent statements. The evidence has proper documentation, and they've created a backstory of anonymous tips leading to the investigation. Fighting this through normal legal channels would be nearly impossible without our additional evidence." When Marcus was finally released on his own recognizance after Carlos pulled strings with a federal judge, he returned home to find his family shaken but resolute. Zora had documented every threatening comment made to her, James had secretly recorded Brad Wilson's intimidation attempts, and Serena had compiled financial evidence showing how businesses that opposed Wilson suffered systematic harassment until they closed or sold to his associates. "They think they've won," Marcus observed as they gathered in the secure operations center. "That's their weakness." Washington nodded grimly. "They've never faced an enemy who understands asymmetric warfare. They have badges and legal authority. We have training and righteousness." The tactical situation had changed, however. Wilson had brought in private security contractors, former military, with tactical training to supplement his police force. Surveillance of police communications revealed they had identified Marcus as the primary target, with orders to document his every movement for additional legal charges. "They're watching for conventional countermoves," Marcus explained during the team briefing. "Legal appeals, public complaints, direct confrontation. They're not prepared for what comes next." Operation Cleansing Rain entered its most aggressive phase that night. Using techniques developed for counterterrorism operations, Marcus's team began systematic disruption of the corrupt network's infrastructure. Torres infiltrated the police department's computer system, inserting evidence of internal theft that implicated Officer Reynolds in stealing from drug seizures. Jackson intercepted and modified communications between Wilson and the mayor, creating the impression that each was planning to betray the other if investigations intensified. Washington's contacts in federal law enforcement began receiving anonymous packages containing partial evidence of civil rights violations, each piece insufficient for prosecution, but substantial enough to trigger preliminary inquiries. Do you think Marcus is justified in using his military tactics against corrupt law enforcement, or has he crossed an ethical line? Comment number 1. If you believe his actions are necessary to protect his family and community, or number 2, if you think he should still try working through the system despite everything that's happened. Like this video if you believe systems should be held accountable when they abuse power, and subscribe for more stories about justice prevailing against corruption. The question now becomes, when those sworn to uphold the law become the criminals, where do we draw the line between justice and vengeance? And what happens when a man trained in warfare brings those skills home to protect what he loves? The warehouse erupted in flames. At precisely 2:17 in the morning, its security systems disabled 4 minutes earlier by a precision electromagnetic pulse that left no electronic evidence. By the time fire trucks arrived, the structure which had housed the largest portion of Wilson's drug inventory was beyond saving. Marcus watched from half a mile away thermal imaging, confirming no personnel had been inside during the controlled burn. Target neutralized Washington confirmed through their secure communication system. Estimated loss to operation, $2 million in product and processing equipment. This marked the third major infrastructure strike in 7 days, following the contamination of a shipment ledger that had sent Wilson's suppliers to the wrong drop point and the anonymous transmission of surveillance photos showing corrupt officers receiving payoffs to the personal phones of every department member. Chief Wilson's response escalated beyond what even Marcus had anticipated. Within 24 hours of the warehouse destruction, Wilson brought in 8 men identified through Torres's intelligence gathering as former private military contractors with experience in counterinsurgency operations. Unlike the local officers, these men had actual combat training and operated with a discipline that presented a more significant tactical challenge. "They're hunting us now," Marcus observed as surveillance footage showed the contractors establishing observation posts around the Reed home and bookstore. Wilson's moved beyond harassment to active neutralization. The tactical shift necessitated corresponding adjustments to Operation Cleansing Rain. Marcus relocated his family to a safe house Torres had established under a corporate identity with Washington providing security, while Jackson maintained electronic countermeasures against surveillance. Marcus himself remained in Riverdale as a visible target, deliberately drawing attention while implementing the next phase of their strategy. The confrontation became a chess match between Wilson's brute force and Marcus's tactical precision. When Wilson sent teams to intimidate businesses that supported the Reed family, they arrived to find federal tax auditors conducting routine inspections arranged through Carlos's connections. When plainclothes officers attempted to plant additional evidence in Marcus's vehicle, they triggered surveillance alerts that brought legitimate state police units to the scene. Most effectively, Marcus began exploiting the corrupt department's poor evidence, handling procedures, ensuring that cases against legitimate criminals were dismissed due to contaminated evidence chains, creating public pressure as crime rates appeared to rise, while successful prosecutions plummeted. Marcus's knowledge of police procedures became a powerful weapon as he systematically undermined the department's credibility and operational effectiveness without ever directly confronting officers. The psychological impact on Wilson's organization became increasingly visible. Officers argued openly during shift changes, suspicious that colleagues might be cooperating with whoever was targeting them. The private contractors demanded more money, as they realized they faced an opponent with tactical training equivalent to their own. Wilson himself began traveling with 2 armed guards, his paranoia growing as each countermove was anticipated and neutralized before it could succeed. The breaking point came when Michelle Reed disappeared. Marcus had escorted her to a dental appointment, maintaining his surveillance countermeasures throughout. As she exited the building, 2 unmarked vans coordinated to create a blind spot in the security camera coverage. By the time Marcus realized what had happened, Michelle was gone, a single earring on the sidewalk, the only evidence of her presence. 4 hours later, Marcus received a text message containing a photo of Michelle bound to a chair, her face bruised, but her eyes defiant. The message was simple: trade yourself for her. Come alone to the abandoned cannery at midnight. Marcus knew it was a trap. The isolated location, the demanded solitary approach, the tight timeline preventing proper reconnaissance, all pointed to an ambush scenario. Standard tactical doctrine would demand a team approach multiple entry points and superior firepower. But Wilson had made a fundamental miscalculation in believing that taking Michelle would provide leverage rather than removing Marcus's last restraint. "They've never actually read my file," Marcus told his team as they gathered at the safe house. "If they had, they'd know why this is the worst mistake they could have made." For the first time since the conflict began, Marcus opened his personal weapons case, removing specialized equipment from his Delta Force operations. As he prepared methodically, Washington recognized the transformation occurring. This wasn't Marcus Reed, the bookstore owner, or even Captain Reed, the military officer. This was Shadow, the operational persona that had made Marcus a legend in special operations circles known for resolving hostage situations. Considered unwinnable by conventional standards, Marcus approached the cannery utilizing infiltration techniques that had once allowed him to penetrate terrorist strongholds unseen. The contractors Wilson had positioned as sentries were skilled by civilian standards but insufficient against an operator of Marcus's caliber. One by one, they were neutralized with non-lethal techniques, their communications devices modified to transmit false all-clear signals. Inside the cannery's main floor, Wilson waited with 4 armed men surrounding Michelle, exactly as Marcus had anticipated. Rather than attempting a direct assault, Marcus employed environmental manipulation, first disrupting the building's electrical system, then introducing a calculated series of distractions that divided the security team's attention. When he finally engaged directly, the resulting confrontation demonstrated why Delta Force operators were considered among the world's elite warriors. Despite being outnumbered, Marcus moved with a speed and precision that shocked the mercenaries. His attacks targeted pressure points and mobility rather than lethal strikes, incapacitating each opponent with minimal force while avoiding crossfire that might endanger Michelle. Wilson himself fired wildly in panic, emptying his weapon into shadows while Marcus systematically dismantled his security detail. When the police chief finally found himself face-to-face with Marcus, he saw not the overweight bookstore owner he had tormented, but a warrior whose controlled violence communicated decades of combat experience. "What the hell are you?" Wilson gasped as Marcus disarmed him with a technique taught only to elite special operations units. "I'm the man who told you to leave my family alone," Marcus replied, securing Wilson with his own handcuffs before freeing Michelle. The rescue operation exposed a critical weakness in Wilson's organization. Confronted with actual resistance from a trained opponent, his tactical leadership collapsed. The private contractors, witnessing their employer's defeat and recognizing the skill level they faced, abandoned their positions rather than engage further. This fracturing accelerated as Torres leaked body cam footage, showing officers discussing evidence planting and protection rackets, creating mutual suspicion about who might be cooperating with investigations to save themselves. State-level law enforcement began preliminary investigations after Carlos Rodriguez formally submitted evidence of civil rights violations too substantial to ignore. Marcus narrowly escaped death 3 days after Michelle's rescue when his vehicle's brake lines were severed during a bookstore inventory delivery. Only his heightened situational awareness and defensive driving training, instinctively pumping the brakes rather than holding them down when they failed, prevented a fatal crash. The assassination attempt crossed a line that transformed the conflict yet again. "They've moved from intimidation to elimination," Marcus told his team that evening. "Which means we implement Contingency Raptor." The contingency, named after a mission in Marcus's classified history, involved comprehensive deployment of all evidence they had gathered, sending detailed documentation of Wilson's operation simultaneously to federal agencies, state authorities, journalists, and oversight organizations. The electronic distribution was untraceable, the evidence irrefutable, and the timing coordinated for maximum impact. As Marcus had anticipated, Wilson's organization began to collapse under external scrutiny and internal paranoia. Officers sought immunity deals, contractors disappeared, and financial backers distanced themselves from the operation. The Shadow War had reached its inflection point, with Marcus's strategic patience and tactical precision systematically dismantling the corrupt system that had targeted his family. As federal investigators began arriving in Riverdale, Marcus prepared for the final confrontation, knowing that Wilson, backed into a corner and facing destruction, would make one desperate, dangerous final move. Chief Wilson sat alone in his office blinds, drawn against the morning sun, a half-empty bottle of bourbon on his desk, despite the early hour. Surveillance photos of Marcus Reed covered one wall alongside tactical assessments and intelligence reports from his dwindling team of loyalists. After weeks of systematic dismantling of his operation, Wilson had finally ordered a comprehensive background investigation into the man he had mistaken for an easy target. The classified file that arrived, heavily redacted but still revealing, had triggered a recognition that explained everything. Captain Marcus Reed Wilson muttered, staring at a decades-old military photo showing a younger, fitter version of his adversary in Delta Force insignia, Shadow Operative. The name unlocked a memory Wilson had spent years trying to suppress. Forward Operating Base Condor, Afghanistan, 2008. Then, Lieutenant Robert Wilson had been assigned as a military police liaison to a special operations compound when a black market opportunity presented itself, selling information about troop movements to local insurgents in exchange for heroin that could be shipped back to the States in military transport containers. The operation had been profitable until an investigation led by Captain Marcus Reed had uncovered the treason. Wilson had escaped prosecution through a plea deal that resulted in a dishonorable discharge rather than a military trial. But he had lost his military career and spent 5 years rebuilding his identity before securing a position in the civilian law enforcement. Now, 15 years later, the man who had destroyed his military career had unwittingly moved into the town where Wilson had established his new criminal enterprise. The harassment of Reed's family hadn't been random. It had been unconscious revenge against a man Wilson hadn't initially recognized but had hated for years. "Sir, we have a problem." Officer Reynolds interrupted Wilson's recollection, entering without knocking. "The FBI just arrested Judge Hamilton and Mayor Peterson. They're talking about RICO charges and a multi-agency task force." Wilson's response was immediate and desperate. "Implement scorched earth. No witnesses, no evidence." The protocol they had established for worst-case scenarios involved destroying all documentation, eliminating potential witnesses, and creating sufficient chaos to cover their escape. Within hours, the department mobilized under the pretense of a major drug interdiction operation, with the remaining loyal officers preparing for what would actually be a purge of anyone who might testify against them. Marcus intercepted the communications through their surveillance system, immediately recognizing the patterns of an organization preparing for desperate measures. "They're going to eliminate everyone who could testify," he told his team during an emergency briefing, "including any officers who've shown reluctance to participate in corruption." Torres's intelligence confirmed the assessment detention cells were being prepared. Vehicles were being positioned at strategic locations, and Wilson had ordered all body cameras disabled for the upcoming operation. Most alarmingly, Wilson had accessed the sealed juvenile records for both Zora and James Reed, along with school records showing their regular locations and schedules. He's identified the children as primary targets. Torres reported her professional demeanor cracking slightly. Tactical teams have been briefed on their descriptions and routines. Marcus's response was cold and precise, the battle-hardened commander fully replacing the bookstore owner. "Implement Thunderclap immediately. Full spectrum, no delays." Operation Thunderclap. The final phase of Marcus's contingency planning had been designed for exactly this scenario when corruption shifted from exploitation to potential lethal action against innocent civilians. Jackson immediately activated their emergency communications network, sending authenticated alerts to federal agencies with jurisdiction over civil rights violations and police corruption. Washington coordinated with Carlos Rodriguez to expedite the deployment of FBI tactical teams already staged nearby based on earlier evidence submissions. Torres initiated their media protocol, releasing key evidence to journalists, with instructions for publication at specific times to maximize impact and public awareness. Marcus himself prepared for direct intervention, knowing the timeline between Thunderclap's initiation and federal response might leave critical minutes where his family and other innocent targets remained vulnerable. The operation accelerated when their surveillance detected Wilson dispatching tactical teams to multiple locations simultaneously, including the school where James had returned for his first day back after recovering from his injuries. "They've moved the timeline up," Marcus observed, checking his equipment with practiced efficiency. "Washington, secure the children. Torres, implement the evidence distribution. Jackson, maintain communications coordination with federal assets. I'll handle Wilson." What Wilson could never have anticipated was that Marcus had identified and cultivated relationships with officers within the department who had been coerced into cooperation with the corruption. Sergeant Rodriguez, Officer Jenkins, and 3 others had been provided with secure communication devices and specific instructions for this scenario. As Wilson's loyal officers prepared to implement Scorched Earth, they found their vehicles mysteriously disabled, their weapons, missing firing pins, and their tactical gear compromised in ways that would not be discovered until moment of use. The internal sabotage created critical delays as Marcus moved into position for the final confrontation. A police-wide alert sent officers rushing to the station under the pretense of an imminent FBI raid, concentrating Wilson's remaining loyal forces in a single location as federal tactical teams approached the city limits. Meanwhile, Marcus infiltrated the police station utilizing architectural knowledge acquired through weeks of surveillance and Torres's facility assessments. Moving through maintenance areas and blind spots in the security camera coverage, he accessed the building's systems core, implementing a prepared package of electronic countermeasures designed to isolate Wilson's communication and prejudice control capabilities. The revelation that transformed the conflict came during the final confrontation in Wilson's office. As Marcus disabled the last of Wilson's bodyguards with precision strikes to pressure points, the police chief backed against his wall of surveillance photos, recognition finally dawning in his eyes. "I know who you are now," Reed Wilson spat blood from a split lip speckling his uniform. "Afghanistan, FOB Condor. You're the one who caught me." Marcus paused, studying Wilson's face with new understanding. "Lieutenant Wilson. Dishonorable discharge, 2008. Selling movement intel to insurgents." The recognition explained everything: the personal nature of the harassment, the escalation beyond typical corruption, the specific targeting of Marcus's family. "You didn't know who I was when I moved to town," Marcus stated, the tactical picture finally complete. "But you recognized a threat to your operation and responded with disproportionate force." Wilson laughed bitterly. 15 years rebuilding what you destroyed. 15 years working my way up, establishing connections, creating a power base. Then you walk into my town with your perfect family and your bookstore like you deserved a happy ending after what you did to me. Marcus maintained his tactical position between Wilson and the weapons on his desk. "What I did was stop you from getting more soldiers killed for your profit. Your choices destroyed your career, not me." Outside the office, sounds of confusion spread as federal tactical teams entered the building, securing corridors and processing corrupt officers identified through Marcus's evidence packages. Wilson heard the commotion and recognized the collapse of his final resistance. His expression shifted from hatred to desperate calculation. "They have nothing concrete on me personally. It's all circumstantial, all attributable to overzealous officers acting without authorization. I've insulated myself." Marcus allowed himself a small, grim smile. "That might have worked if you hadn't made one critical error." He removed a small device from his pocket, a sophisticated recording system that had captured every word of Wilson's admission about Afghanistan, along with his scorched earth order and the targeting of Marcus's children. "You forgot the first rule of tactical operations: know your enemy's capabilities before you engage." As federal agents approached Wilson's office, the corrupt chief made one final desperate move, reaching for a concealed weapon in his desk drawer. Marcus's response was measured and precise, disarming Wilson with a technique that left him immobilized but uninjured as FBI tactical officers breached the door. "Robert Wilson," announced the FBI team leader, "you're under arrest for civil rights violations, corruption, conspiracy, drug trafficking, and attempted murder." As Wilson was secured and removed, Marcus stood alone in the office that had been the command center for so much corruption and suffering. On the wall, his own surveillance photos stared back at him, images of a man who had tried to leave violence behind, but had been forced to embrace his training once more to protect everything he loved. Outside, the sounds of justice being implemented echoed through the station, as the system that had been weaponized against his family was finally held accountable. The Riverdale police station buzzed with coordinated activity as FBI agents processed evidence and detained officers. In the central booking area, Chief Wilson sat handcuffed to a bench, watching his corrupt empire collapse around him. Marcus stood near the dispatch desk, coordinating with Carlos Rodriguez as federal authorities implemented the final stages of the operation. The moment of apparent victory shattered when Jackson's voice crackled through Marcus's secure earpiece emergency at Westridge High School. Wilson's remaining tactical team is on site. They have hostages. Wilson's smirk confirmed the warning his final contingency plan implemented despite his capture. Insurance policy, he stated coldly. My most loyal men have your kids and others. Federal jurisdiction gets complicated when hostages are involved, doesn't it? Marcus's mind calculated options with machine-like precision, factoring response times, tactical capabilities, and the specific threat to civilians. You've been broadcasting everything to the feds, playing by rules, Wilson continued. My men don't have that limitation. They'll eliminate witnesses unless I personally give the stand-down code every 30 minutes, starting with your fat kids. The racial undertone in Wilson's final insult revealed the hatred that had driven his escalating campaign against the Reed family. Without warning, the police station's power cut out emergency lighting, casting harsh shadows across the booking area. In the momentary confusion, Marcus moved with fluid efficiency, utilizing the tactical architecture he had memorized during weeks of surveillance. When emergency power restored partial lighting 20 seconds later, both Marcus and Wilson had vanished from the booking area. All units secure the building, Carlos shouted into his radio. Possible hostage situation developing. What the federal agents couldn't know was that Marcus had planned for this contingency. The power outage triggered by Washington as part of an extraction protocol designed for precisely this scenario. Using access routes mapped during their intelligence gathering, Marcus had removed Wilson from federal custody and was now moving him through maintenance corridors toward a secondary exit. You won't get far, Wilson gasped, as Marcus efficiently navigated the building's blind spots. Every officer in 3 counties will be looking for you. Marcus didn't waste breath, responding his focus entirely on the tactical situation at the school where his children were being held. Emergency protocols would lock down the building, creating a defensible position for Wilson's men, but also containing the threat to a known parameter. Exiting through a service door temporarily disabled in security systems, Marcus transferred Wilson to a vehicle where Washington waited with engine running. School situation confirmed. Washington reported as they secured Wilson in the back seat. 4 armed men, approximately 22 hostages, including Zora and James, in the cafeteria. SWAT mobilizing, but standard protocol mandates negotiation first. Marcus nodded, having anticipated this response pattern. Implementation time. 17 minutes from arrival on scene, Washington confirmed, referring to their pre-planned counter-operation. As they approached Westridge High School, a perimeter of police vehicles already surrounded the building, with tactical teams establishing positions and negotiators attempting to establish communication with the hostage-takers. Marcus identified the incident commander, a state police captain with negotiation training but limited hostage extraction experience. Captain Marcus addressed him after proper identification from Carlos secured their access to the command post. The men inside are former private military contractors hired by Chief Wilson. They're not interested in negotiations, they're eliminating witnesses to corruption charges. The captain studied Marcus skeptically. And you're certain of this because... Marcus nodded to Washington, who activated a secure tablet displaying the surveillance feed Torres had already established inside the school through its security system. The feed showed 4 armed men in tactical gear, holding students and staff at gunpoint in the cafeteria. Among the hostages, Zora and James sat with forced calm, their military family training, evident in their controlled breathing and situational awareness. They've disabled the school's communication systems, but not the security cameras, Marcus explained. They're waiting for regular communication from Wilson, who I've brought to provide the stand-down code. The tactical situation required careful management of jurisdictional authorities while addressing the immediate threat to hostages. Marcus had no official standing, but possessed critical knowledge and capabilities the official response team lacked. "Captain, I have specialized hostage rescue experience and intimate knowledge of these men's tactics," Marcus stated with calm authority. "I'm requesting permission to implement a coordinated extraction with your tactical team." What followed was a compressed planning session with Marcus providing insights into the hostage-takers' training vulnerabilities and likely response patterns. The State Police Tactical Commander recognized the value of Marcus's expertise, incorporating his recommendations into their approach while maintaining official control of the operation. Wilson, secured in a police vehicle and monitored by Washington, provided the necessary stand-down codes at the required intervals, buying time for the extraction team to move into position. Marcus himself insisted on joining the entry team, his knowledge of the specific threats overriding protocols about civilian involvement. Wearing borrowed tactical gear, he moved with the state police team through service corridors Torres had identified as blind spots in the hostage-taker's defensive position. The extraction operation demonstrated why Marcus had once been considered among the military's elite operators. His movements were precise and economical, his tactical awareness anticipating threats before they manifested. When the team breached the cafeteria from 3 points simultaneously, Marcus moved directly to neutralize the leader, a contractor he had identified through previous surveillance as having military training specific to hostage scenarios. The resulting operation lasted exactly 4 minutes and 27 seconds. All 4 hostage-takers were neutralized with no civilian casualties, though one state police officer sustained a non-critical injury during the breach. As medical teams secured the scene and processed the shaken hostages, Marcus found himself face-to-face with his children for the first time since the conflict had escalated to direct confrontation. James, still showing signs of his previous injuries, stood straight, despite his pain. Zora's expression reflected not trauma, but a complex pride in witnessing her father's true capabilities. "You never told us exactly what you did in the military," she said quietly, as tactical teams processed the subdued hostage-takers. "I thought Mom was exaggerating." Marcus embraced them both, the warrior receding as the father reasserted priority. "There are parts of my past I hoped you'd never need to see," he admitted, "but never doubt I would use every skill I have to protect you." The aftermath unfolded over subsequent weeks with the systematic precision that had characterized Marcus's entire operation. Evidence packages Torres had assembled were processed by federal authorities, leading to indictments throughout Riverdale's power structure. The mayor faced corruption charges, the judge was removed pending investigation, and 27 officers from Wilson's department were prosecuted for various offenses, ranging from evidence tampering to civil rights violations. Marcus himself testified before a federal grand jury, providing detailed documentation of the systematic corruption and discrimination that had infected Riverdale's governance. His military background became public knowledge during the proceedings, though specific details of his classified operations remained redacted in official records. The legal process moved with appropriate deliberation, but the outcome was unambiguous. Wilson received multiple consecutive sentences, ensuring he would never return to Riverdale or hold authority again. 6 months after the final confrontation, Reed's reopened, with a community celebration that reflected the town's determination to heal. The bookstore had been renovated and expanded to include a community center focused on civil rights, education, police community relations, and youth development programs. The Riverdale Police Department underwent complete restructuring under state oversight, with Officer Jenkins, fully recovered from his injuries, appointed as interim chief pending permanent reforms. Marcus found himself approached by state law enforcement about consulting on civil rights compliance and community policing initiatives. His unique perspective, bridging military precision with civilian values, considered valuable in reforming departments beyond just Riverdale. On a warm spring afternoon, as Marcus conducted a training session for newly hired officers about constitutional rights and proper police procedures, he noticed Serena watching from the doorway, a mixture of pride and lingering concern in her eyes. "Never thought I'd see you in a police station by choice," she commented, as the trainees filed out after the session. Marcus surveyed the rebuilt department now staffed by officers committed to constitutional policing and community service. Sometimes the best way to prevent the past from repeating is to help shape the future, he responded. Besides, he added, with the first genuine smile in months, someone needs to make sure these young officers understand that appearances can be deceiving. Not every threat comes in an obvious package. Outside Riverdale continued its recovery, the community strengthened rather than divided by the exposure of corruption that had festered beneath its surface. Marcus Reed, bookstore owner, family man, and shadow warrior, had found a new mission in ensuring that the system that had once been weaponized against his family would become the protection it was always meant to be. As he walked home that evening, nodding to neighbors who now knew something of his true capabilities, Marcus reflected on the journey from violence to peace and back again. The skills he had hoped to leave behind had ultimately been necessary to protect everything he valued, but their purpose now was prevention rather than conflict, ensuring that no other family would face the systematic abuse his had endured. The shadow warrior had emerged when needed, but the man who remained was determined to build something more lasting than victory, justice that served everyone equally, regardless of appearance, weight, or the color of their skin. What would you do if you discovered corruption in your own community? Would you have the courage to stand against a broken system even at personal risk? Comment below with your thoughts on how ordinary citizens can help ensure justice works for everyone. If this story of an underestimated man fighting back against discrimination and corruption resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who believe in standing up for what's right. Thank you for joining me for this journey of justice served, and remember, never judge someone's capabilities by their appearance. The most powerful forces for change often come from those the system has underestimated. This story teaches us that appearances can be dangerously deceiving. The corrupt police force saw only Marcus Reed's weight and skin color, creating a fatal blind spot that allowed them to underestimate the very man capable of dismantling their entire operation. Their racist assumptions prevented them from recognizing the tactical genius behind the unassuming exterior. True power often lies beneath the surface, invisible to those who judge based on superficial characteristics. The story also highlights how systems meant to protect can become weapons of oppression when corrupted by prejudice and greed. When institutions fail, sometimes justice requires individuals with specialized skills to restore balance. Yet Marcus's greatest strength wasn't his Delta Force training, it was his strategic patience and moral clarity. He fought not for revenge, but to protect his family and community from systematic abuse. The transformation of the police department following Wilson's defeat reminds us that corrupt systems can be reformed when brave individuals stand against injustice. Marcus ultimately chose to help rebuild rather than simply destroy, understanding that lasting change requires both accountability for past wrongs and constructive vision for the future. His journey demonstrates that sometimes we must confront painful pasts to create better futures, and that true strength comes not from dominance, but from using our abilities to protect the vulnerable and uphold justice for all. What would you do if faced with discrimination and corruption in your own community? Would you have the courage to stand up against a broken system even when the odds seem stacked against you? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever been underestimated because of how you look? Share your experiences and how you proved others wrong. If this story of an underestimated hero fighting back against injustice resonated with you, please hit that like button to help more people discover it. Subscribe to my channel for more powerful stories about everyday heroes who refuse to be defined by others' expectations. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, share this video with them today. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Marcus Reed's fight for justice. Remember, the most powerful force for change often comes from those the system has underestimated. Until next time, stay strong and never judge a book by its cover.